This project is called The Unwanted Population. It's a Vietnamese exodus project. It's an ongoing work that I have been doing since 2009. I took a break from that and came back again in 2014. I have started by looking into the history of the Vietnamese refugees that fled Vietnam after the fall of Saigon in 1975. And you look at the map, it maps the migration trajectories of the Vietnamese. In particular, if you look at the red arrows that are all coming out from Vietnam, those arrows actually mapped the Vietnamese refugees' boat trajectory. And then there are different colors in the map. So if you see the pink areas, those are the countries that hosted the Vietnamese refugees temporarily, or you could call them ports of first asylum, where we had either refugee camps or detention centers for the Vietnamese. And the countries that are coded green are the resettlement countries. And there are several areas where you see a gray color. Those were kind of transit points, very quick transit points for the Vietnamese. 2000 is the year where the last refugee camp in Hong Kong was shut down. So this history spans over a period of 25 years. Now, with the map, I was looking at the Vietnamese refugees' history, but since that history has been erased into oblivion in the country, there's not a whole lot of information about it. The established narrative has always been about the Vietnamese fleeing the country, staying in ports of first asylum in the region, and then waited for resettlement offers and ended up in the West. That narrative has always been, well, we were refugees, but then we became regular immigrants and eventually citizens. I have done a lot of work at the UNHCR archives. For me to go back in and try to learn this history and try to actually reconstruct this history, I had to reconstruct it from very fragmented pieces of information. So if you look along the shelf on my left side, all these corresponding cables that are on display here is just a fraction of what I have collected and what the UNHCR has been holding. There's a vast amount of material at the UNHCR about this history, now all declassified. But even then, the UNHCR doesn't know the content, especially all the content of the material. So I would have to come in and really digging into this vast amount of material to go through them. And these records that I have selected and displayed here are the records that I chose to show how the world was thrown into chaos around the time of the fall of Saigon. So the cable started from probably a month or 2 weeks before that date until like a month after that date. Another very important aspect of this project is to pass on this knowledge of the history that has been erased to the younger generation in Vietnam. I worked with a group of young Vietnamese painters in Saigon. The photos that I use for this painting project are from different eras. So you would have like the very iconic photographs of the Vietnamese refugees during the crisis, and combining with the photographs that I shot of the sites of the former Vietnamese refugee camps or detention centers in Hong Kong. We talk a lot about the refugee crisis. But we don't really talk a lot about the people, about the refugees themselves, and where have they ended up, and what have they become. I follow a group of former Vietnamese refugees in Hong Kong in the past 2-3 years, and a lot of them ended up being homeless in Hong Kong. So I visited them quite often, and I took some photographs of them, and I ended up creating this digital sketch, combining, layering the photos from different eras, a photo from different sources, and create these epic stories of the Vietnamese refugee history. And I divided into 7 segments and gave these 7 segments of the sketch to the young painters, and we worked together to develop the paintings. And throughout the process, we discussed a lot about this history and the political context of the paintings that they were working on, they were looking at. So that is, a very important aspect of this project, is to pass on this knowledge. I see my work as a protest of this politically driven historical amnesia in Vietnam, protesting against this erasure of history and memory. And that's what I'm interested in. And I also do ethnographic field work. For example, I went to Hong Kong. I've been following the former Vietnamese refugees that are still in Hong Kong or have resettled in Hong Kong. And I've been doing that in the past 3 years. And the way I do it is to be part of the community. I don't ask too many questions. I don't give them a list of questions. I don't interview. I just simply, be part of the community. And being a Vietnamese helped. Speaking the language, sharing the same history really helped me to be part of that community. And through that, I would take the bus with them. I would follow them everywhere, taking the ferry to Macau. And during those trips, people would share stories and, the experience of their escape, of them being in detention, of them growing up in detention. So that's how that's my methodology. And with the current refugees in Europe that I have a chance to work with and to teach, especially the young ones, I don't ask questions. We know better. If you work at a refugee support organization, you know better than asking questions. We really tiptoe around, and we just simply be there, just lend an ear. And after a few years mentoring a kid, they would tell you stories that you would just like, it could really shake you to the core. And that kind of stories, it's just something that that helped the process. But at the same time, I don't use those stories in my work, especially for the current refugee crisis. But like I said, I come from a policy angle, and I want to really focus on that. And of course, you look at the policies, you unpack them, and then you hear the refugee experience. That is something that you keep cross-check, back and forth. So I don't oppose to the idea that my work is a form of activism, but I don't see myself so much as an activist, but I see myself as just trying to be a decent human being. And by doing that, by bringing back this history, it's not just for the sake of learning history, but it's also about how to shed light into the current refugee crisis worldwide. And when I do this kind of work, I always have to keep myself in check. And the reason for it is you have to understand why you're doing this and whether it would benefit anybody. So for me, to bring back the Vietnamese Exodus history is is a way, I mean, I come from the policy angle. My work really unpacked like several policies that were emerged and imposed on the Vietnamese refugees in the past. And those asylum policies, if you compare it to what's going on right now, the same policies that have been used in Europe. So working at the UNHCR to pull out all these archival records, I also have an opportunity to actually, hear about all the stories and all the crises, refugee crises worldwide that UNHCR have to deal with. And I just hope for the work to contribute into this demand to change certain policies that somehow would benefit the current refugees.